Some are familiar, some are new. Coming up, an in-depth look at NBAA's top safety focus areas. From the National Business Aviation Association, this is Flight Plan. I'm Pete Combs with your trusted source for business aviation news. Every year, the NBAA Safety Committee issues its list of top safety focus areas for business aviation. Now, these are tremendously important issues that directly impact the safety of flight operations across the business aviation spectrum. Joining me to talk about this, from Orlando, Paul Rotte, Aviation Safety Programs Director at USAIG and a long-standing member of the NBAA Safety Committee. Lauren Hanna, Flight Data Analyst at Flight Data Services, as well as a new NBAA Safety Committee member. She's in Castle Pines, Colorado. And Mark Larson, Senior Manager of Safety and Flight Operations at NBAA. He's coming to us from Roseville, California. First, let me turn to Paul. How does a particular issue make it onto the NBAA list of top safety focus areas?
Well, it's a combination of factors, Pete. First off, we try to be data-driven, so we can look at things that have happened in business aviation mishaps and incidents over the past years and start there, but that only tells a piece of the story. The way the committee gets beyond that is we get a room full of 50-plus learned experts, practitioners in the fine art of business aviation, and we get their collective wisdom churning on what the body feels is the real root of risk today and moving forward, because that's really what we're after. And we think that combination of starting with the data-driven approach and then washing it through a large group of passionate professionals that are actually doing the job today, that gets us to a pretty clear vision of the things that are presenting risks and threats to business aviation today and moving into the near-term future over the next year. And that gives us a backdrop to begin developing a list that's actionable.
Let me ask Lauren, we see how items can get on the list. Paul just told us that. But how do items get off the list?
That's a good question. I think one of the things, Paul hit it on the head, of the fine art of business aviation. It's the best way to put it. The committee changes itself. I'm one of the newer committee members. So when you get, more fresh blood in, you see some of the newer topics that are coming up.
And before we get to the list, let me just ask Paul one other question about how things work in this list. What action is taken as a result of getting them on that list?
Well, at the outset, the hope is that this list forms kind of a checklist, so to speak, of each individual business aviation operator's safety program and safety focus. It's a list that you can look at as an operator and say, am I covered in each one of these areas? And if not, maybe I need to put a little bit more effort into it.
Let's go to the list itself now. And Mark, let me ask you to introduce the first topic, loss of control in flight. Tell me a little bit about why this made the list and has made the list for some time.
Loss of control in flight remains on the list as it continues to be the most fatal business aviation accident type. And certainly there's a significant frequency to this as well that had our attention in the data. The focus that we've had in addressing this, in addition to providing a wide range of resources through the NBA website, and then being actively engaged in efforts to address, the need for upset prevention and recovery training, looking at that really as a full spectrum, all the way from prevention clear through to recovery techniques as may be necessary.
What can we ask our members to do to reduce that risk of loss of control in flight, Lauren?
One of the ways they can do it is just asking questions, looking at the data, look for any trending in what's happening, getting more familiar with the aircraft that you're flying, hand flying the aircraft every once in a while, looking at what's happening and not letting automation get away from you.
I think at the outset, knowledge is king here. So, a comprehensive review of aerodynamics and the factors of aerodynamics that can lead to loss of control is a huge first step, but some of the training experts have proven that that's only a first step. Actually getting experience, potentially in aircraft experience, to tame the startle reflex and cement some of those basics is a good thing. And then moving into type-specific training, perhaps performed in the simulators, hopefully performing simulators for some of these loss of control maneuvers. So there's a continuum, and the point being is wherever you're at on the continuum, start moving up it. That'll get you into a safer, more preventatively postured against loss of control.
Mark, would you like to introduce the second of our top safety focus areas, which would be runway excursions?
Yeah, so the second top safety focus area is to reduce the risk of runway excursions. Runway excursions are the most common business aviation accident, and we see these with really a regular frequency. There's a number of well-recognized and well-identified risk factors that have come into play in these runway excursion events. And so, things like overcoming the resistance to go around when that's really necessary, adhering to stabilized approach and landing criteria, also really critical in these cases. And then using accurate and timely runway condition data are really some kind of key pieces to helping prevent these types of accidents.
Lauren, tell me, if you would, about how the TALPA initiative fits into all this. TALPA, of course, is the Takeoff and Landing Procedure Assessment, a process designed to greatly reduce overruns in cases when the runway itself isn't dry.
So the TALPA initiative, that kind of hits close to home. My husband's a Southwest pilot. That's kind of what kicked it all off, early 2000s?
That's right.
Yeah, so it's hard because corporate aviation, and then looking at, you've got the C-suite in the back, or mahogany row, or however you like to refer to it. You want to have a smooth landing. You don't want to make your, people that are paying your paycheck angry, but you also need to get them down and safe. So looking at data and trying to justify both ways, you can kind of see how the TALPA initiative, it helps teach pilots and teach the flight crews why they should just get it down in the touchdown zone and land the plane. But on the flip side, they don't want to slam it down on the runway. So, where do you go with that? And I think that kind of helps give some answers and shares the data and the information that needs to be out there.
Paul, one of the things that Mark mentioned a moment ago was a resistance to the idea of going around and trying the approach again. How can we do that? How can we kind of wake ourselves up to that resistance?
A lot's been put into streamlining the approach briefings, and people tend to actually fuel strength of an idea with their very curt and focused approach brief that almost makes a foregone conclusion that a landing is to follow. And at the same time, we've made the approach briefings very rote and very specific and very quick to deliver. We may have missed a little bit in terms of thinking about, well, what if we have to go around, and making sure that aspect is covered in the approach briefing.
Mark, would you like to introduce our next safety focus area, which would be actually out of the cockpit? And this one is ground operations and handling incidents.
Yeah, this is one that when we look at it, we've gotten a lot of feedback from the membership through our risk assessment survey that we're seeing a lot of ground handling issues, including collisions of aircraft and ground support equipment or vehicles operating on the airport surface. Thankfully, there's a very low number of fatalities with this type of incident, but certainly significant costs associated with repairs, time out of service, and diminution of value of the aircraft. As I had kind of earlier said, our risk assessment survey, the responses there indicated within the last 2 years, 47% of respondents had between 1 and 3 ground handling events, and roughly another 10% had 4 or more events over that same time period. So certainly an issue from our perspective. We think this is something that with some proper education, engagement, and insight between the operators and the FBOs and the airports, that we can help effectively reduce this risk to business aviation operations.
Paul, let me ask you, this is a company-wide issue we need to all address, no matter what your position is within the company.
Sure. I think there's so many different causes of this, and that may be contributing to so many people being intimately familiar with them. Because certainly a ground handling incident can result from a flight crew oversight or something the flight crew did unexpectedly, but it can also come from so many other threat vectors, be it a linesman or even somebody that's disassociated with the operation in general. A passenger is allowed to bring a vehicle on the ramp, and there are particular risks and visual illusions that happen when suddenly you're out there on an aviation ramp driving in a vehicle. So yes, it can come from a number of different threat vectors, and everyone should be aware And the defenses to that should cross-cut multiple avenues of the workforce.
Lauren, do you have any thoughts on how to prevent ground handling incidents? Maybe take your time. Is that one thing that we could all learn?
I think take your time and just more standardization. I mean, it really does. It kind of runs the gauntlet of anything could happen. You could have, kids running off the airplane. You could have somebody trying to park an airplane with the linesman and not realizing if this airplane pushes up the thrust so much, it's going to blow the doors off the hangar behind it. Trying to get all of these airplanes, it's pretty interesting to watch a tarmac when you are going to an event or an airport like Teterboro or Van Nuys. It's, lots of corporate airplanes or Arapahoe, APA, Centennial. You've got lots of corporate aircraft going into one spot. Everybody wants you to come park at their FBO. Everybody wants you to buy their fuel. So they're going to try and squish as many people in as they can. Getting that many people in that one spot, it needs to be a little bit more standardized. They need to make sure they do the safest practices. But do we all know, are there any safe practices set out there? How do they control that?
Lauren, I think you kind of started to hit a great point here too, in the sense that there are some places that it's a little tighter. We've got airplanes that have certainly grown in wingspan and length overall, and that's just some of the geometry of that is becoming unique in some situations. And I think, further guidance would sort of suggest to flight crews, if there's any doubt, let's make sure that we've got folks that are walking the wings, so we're not inadvertently running those into other aircraft parts, fences, that kind of thing too.
AIG emphasized to our operators is simply be present when your aircraft is being moved. You're another set of eyes, and in fact, you're a stakeholder carrying set of eyes on that airframe. And if you're just letting the linesman of a third party move and spot your aircraft, and you're going to show up 15 minutes later from the hotel, that's one way to look at it, but it's probably not the best way.
It's really hard. Like, that's a great, in theory, be with the airplane. But, you park your airplane and all of a sudden the first day it's 70 degrees. The next day you're going to have frost and you need to have like a 5 a.m. takeoff. So you need to hangar the plane. And if you can't get back out there, it's such a hard thing. So I think it really falls back onto the FBOs to have a little bit more training. And like Mark was saying, standardization of how aircraft are moved and where they're moved and things like that too.
Mark, let's talk about our next important safety area, and that would be single pilot operations. We need to improve safety there, correct?
We certainly do. With this one, we're seeing that there is a higher percentage of accidents within business aviation when you're looking at single pilot operations versus those flown by more than one flight crew member. And so that is an area that both recognizing that there's a significant community within business aviation that is operating single pilot capable aircraft. We want to make sure that the resources that we're producing from a safety standpoint are addressing that unique cockpit environment versus the two pilot environment and addressing what may be unique risks to that area. One such kind of thing that we've identified with a recent study that we had released at our single pilot safety stand down this past year was that the significant number of accidents that came back within the top 4 were as a result of controlled flight into terrain. And there is work that the General Aviation Joint Steering Group is doing.
For the single pilot safety stand down, we're really emphasizing the importance of the type clubs to help the single pilots master those skills that you get in challenging environments. When you usually have somebody else in the cockpit with you, you can look at them and get their feedback. But when you're the only one there, you have to make that decision on your own. And that can be really challenging sometimes.
I think one of the factors in the single pilot sphere of operations is that many of the single pilot operators in business aviation don't exercise flying as their primary occupation or responsibility. They're spread a little bit thinner because they do other things. They're some functionary in a business organization, or they have some other specialty, and yet they are also capable of flying, and they also have access to a single pilot aircraft, so they will fly on occasion for business purposes, but at other times all their talents, all their energies are pulled in another direction. So I think on balance, some of those type of operators have less frequency of ops. Their proficiency is obviously affected by that. They may have less access to high-end training, simulator training in their background, and that means they need to exercise a little bit more self-awareness of their limitations. And certainly, a very complex airspace on a very complex weather day will not be forgiving of any pilot that's up there, dual pilot or single pilot. And if you get yourself into those situations, it's easier to get yourself in over your head if you don't have all that recency of experience and high-level training standing behind you.
Yeah, Paul's spot on there. What we also noticed in the data was a significant trend in single pilot risk management issues, and that has been an area that this particular working group of the safety committee has addressed with our single pilot risk management resource, and there's a flight risk assessment tool that we've also developed specific to single pilot operations that helps address that. And the real reality is that there may be a number of circumstances that in order to address that potential risk in flight, it's the kind of thing you've got to address on the ground before you ever took off in the first place. Waiting till you're already airborne and en route may honestly be too late to fully address that in a way that's likely to be workable for what you're trying to accomplish.
When we're talking about single pilot operations, one of the things that may be first at hand in trying to deal with that is automation and trying to manage that correctly. And let me ask Paul, this is sort of an overlap, isn't it, to single pilot operations?
Certainly, automation can be a godsend in that particular environment when there isn't another person, but at the same time, there isn't a second opinion to correct for a misuse or a misunderstanding of the automation on board. So it becomes even more paramount that the single pilot has to know their automation inside and out.
Lauren, even when you talk about single pilot operations and the challenges that a single pilot operator faces dealing with automation, that's not at all restricted to single pilot operations. We see that when you have a full cockpit contingent as well.
Yes, that's correct. And a lot of times both of them don't even know what's happening or what's the airplane doing. And, we all learn it from basic, when you're getting your private pilots, fly the plane. That's the first thing, fly the plane, work the problem. But when automation's taking over, it can be a little bit of a mind boggle, right? When the plane's doing something, you think you're doing it right. We're all taught that, the plane knows best, the automation knows best. But what obviously in the recent events, with Ethiopia and Indonesia, it doesn't know best sometimes. And when you even got two people in there, or one person, or a whole slew of people, it can get a little confusing.
When you're looking at a flight management system, especially a new system, one that you haven't worked with, maybe it's in a type of aircraft that you've just gotten rated in, it pays to sort of study that, doesn't it? And I don't think there's a lot of formal training for some of these FMS operations, right?
I agree. I believe that there needs to be a lot better training. It may be the same type of aircraft, but it's a whole new ballgame because it's much newer. It's got much more automation. It's doing different things.
Mark, what can we say about human-reported and automated safety data, which is another one of our top safety focus areas?
With this top safety focus area, we really see an ability to help the industry transition from a reactive, post-incident or post-accident analysis of what happened and what went wrong to more of a, proactive, what could go wrong, certainly hand in hand with our safety management efforts overall. And with that, making sure that not only is that information that is available within a given flight organization, but that information is shared broadly. There's truly a benefit to aggregating all of that data among multiple operators to make sure that we're seeing, the bigger picture trends that are occurring, the things that can lead to these accidents and incidents that we've talked about, and making sure that maybe we've had an operator that learned the lesson the hard way once. We've all got the ability to benefit from the sharing of everything from narrative safety reports, the things that were identified in that manner, to also what things like flight operations data or flight data monitoring can tell us through those types of programs, and looking at recorded flight data as well.
Paul, the importance of sharing data and also the importance of analyzing the data that is shared.
Well, I'll take it one step even before that question, because we may have just overlooked a small but very important word in that top safety focus area: increased use. The word use, and what we mean by that is we want the operators individually to use their own data to better understand their own operation. That's kind of the multiplication and division before we get to the algebra kind of step in this. And we really felt that there are operators out there that have not unlocked that potential even to fully understand their own operation. So we feel like if you're using the data and you're learning things within your own operation, you'll become even more enfranchised and open to sharing your own data. When you see what it can do for you, you'll be more encouraged, I guess, to let your data participate in the broader consortium to help the industry at large. So we really think that's the unlocking phase, is to get using your own data. And for some operators, they say it's more evolutionary, very small little things that they've learned about their operation that they can use to tweak and move their operation gradually in small steps towards a safer, more efficient operation. But in some occasional operations, it's more revolutionary. They suddenly find like, wow, we had some real gaps in our culture here where we thought one thing, but something else was happening entirely. And the data allowed us to see that and make a step increase in our level of focus and getting everybody on the same page. So use it first, and that should turn you on to sharing it.
Lauren, do you and your organization have a way of internally sharing safety information in this manner?
We do. Yeah, that's actually what we do. There's the internal sharing, so you can benchmark and look at other carriers, but there's also, MITRE's SIS program, IATA's flight data exchange, being able to benchmark and look at other things. But like Paul mentioned, the use aspect of that, getting people to actually do it. It's got such a bad reputation. People think, oh, it's Big Brother watching me. Oh, I'm going to lose my job. And I think one of the big pushes for the NBAA Safety Committee is to say, no, it's not. It's proactive. Like Mark said, it's your crystal ball. If you could predict an accident or you could predict something going wrong, wouldn't you want to? Wouldn't you want to use that data and do it in a just culture? Get your pilots to buy in, show them the better aspects of it, the good things about data, evidence-based training, all the different wonderful things they can get from the data, and not the fact that you're going to lose your job or it's Big Brother watching you. It's a good thing and not a bad thing.
The last item, but certainly not the least on our list of top safety focus areas from the NBAA Safety Committee, controlled flight into terrain. Paul, let's start with you.
Controlled flight into terrain kind of left the list for a while, and now it came back on, and people wondered, hey, is there some cosmic message going on there? And the reality of it is it's continuing to show up in mishaps, and business aviation encompasses a lot of different types of operations, and the quick to altitude long range flyers that just make their descent into their expected airport. That is not necessarily the type of operation that's exposed to a high level of risk for CFIT, controlled flight into terrain. But there's many business aviation operations, tours, aeromedical operations, those types of things that are operating much lower, much closer to terrain, and we're finding that those mishaps are still occurring. So I think just on the frequency of occurrence continuing to be there, and cross-cutting into the automation theme, because automation can be behind some of these things, either through its use or its non-use, even when it's installed. We know we have some great automation features that assist as defenses to controlled flight into the terrain, but if it's not understood, not used properly, or used at all, those threats and risks come right back into the picture.
Mark, let me ask you on that particular topic. I'm seeing that controlled flight into terrain occurs in more than 15% of all GA accidents and fatalities. We have the technology to avoid these sorts of accidents. Why do they still constitute such a large percentage of overall accidents and incidents?
Well, certainly there's a significant number of aircraft that are equipped with things like terrain awareness and warning systems that can be that line of defense, as Paul's really talked about. With this, I think one of the things that we saw in at least one recent example was that the warnings were essentially disabled based on the flying that they were doing. Certainly, if you have it on board, we would encourage operators to be sure that they're using it to its full intended effect. With that, for operators that may not have it, certainly be looking to that as a potential line of defense to help against this particular threat too.
Let me ask one last question of Lauren, and that is, not too long ago, FAA started talking about a very close call in California where a commercial aircraft got within a few hundred feet of a mountain. They're in rising terrain coming out of, I believe it was Los Angeles. This pilot was vectored in that area. That could happen to anyone. Everybody's human. When you run into a situation like that, Were you being vectored, especially in areas where you have rising terrain? Does it not pay to look at your chart and be very aware, even if you're being vectored?
It does pay, but if we think about when you're saturated with task, what's it, task saturation at that point, and when you're getting vectored, yeah, it's a whole different ballgame, right? That's where your CRM comes in, and that's where, if you're by yourself in a single pilot situation, you've got a lot going on as one person, let alone if you had another person there to help.
That's Lauren Hanna, one of the newest members of the NBAA Safety Committee, speaking from Castle Pines, Colorado. You also heard from longtime Safety Committee member Paul Ratte, Aviation Safety Program Director for USAIG based near Orlando, and NBAA Senior Manager of Safety and Flight Operations Mark Larson, who spoke to us from Roseville, California. There's a tremendous amount of safety information on the website. You'll find it at nbaa.org/safety. And that's the latest from the National Business Aviation Association. Remember, you can subscribe to all Flight Plan podcasts at Apple's iTunes website, your favorite podcast website, or download them from nbaa.org. I'm Pete Combs. Thanks for listening to Flight Plan.